Hello everybody, I hope you're all doing great. Danny Dan here, welcome back to Danny's Recreational Space. The challenge of today's video is to come up with an easy solution to convert plastic cases of pretty much all shapes into action figures torsos, providing them with swiveling heads and limbs, imitating the way the humongously popular 5-point superarticulation action figures were made back in the day. While in the previous video, to create the torso of my action figure, I used an enclosure provided with a screw, namely a vintage European power plug, today all the plastic cases I'll use to make my figurines do not come with any type of closing mechanism, so I'll have to make one myself. Plastic enclosures have already a shape of their own, usually squared, rectangular, spherical, and so on. Using them to make action figure torsos is going to highly influence the aesthetic of the figure we want to make. No doubts about that. But we don't really care, do we? Because what we want to make here are just bulky robots and absurd bulky robot DINOMONSTROSITIES. Just like this one. My goodness, what a babe! Whoa, you behave yourself and give this cutie a break, would you, you monoclonius? Squared plastic cases are probably the most available of all. This in particular comes from a laptop power cable. In my opinion, casings with this shape are kind of suitable to create action figures with lateral limbs that recall four-legged animals like a dog or dinosaurs and the like. And in fact, this is just the type of casing I use to make the main body of my DINOMONSTROSITY. On the contrary though, it might probably be less indicated to recreate humanoid figures, since, if set upright, the upper limbs can clash with the lower ones when moved. A solution could be to come up with slightly slanted arms. Slightly slanted. Say that 10 times. More detached from the body, so to avoid them clashing against the legs. In this particular example here, the upper portion of both arms were cut at a 45-degree angle. So, arms that don't clash with the legs, we said. Well, this could be a solution, but still you have to be okay having this kind of protruding legs, and this much room in the middle. I actually could think of a modification that could be performed on the torso, in order to have thighs in line with the waist, like most action figures in commerce have. But that's material for the next video, so I won't spoil it. Let's now see what it might be like using cases with a round shape instead, like the dental floss cases, like Christmas clear plastic fillable bowls and Kinder Surprise egg prize pods. You see how using this kind of cases to make action figure torsos, the arms of your figure won't collide with the legs, because arms and legs are not on the same line. Moreover, cutting the leg joints at a 45 degrees angle, they can still rotate, making the figure posable. Nothing new really, look. Action figures like this Lawrence Limburger from the Biker Mice from Mars toy line, they work in the same way. And he's not the only example of this I could find amongst my collection of figurines. But what I think is kind of cool with a casing like this one is that the upper limbs can be also positioned at any point really along the division line of the casing. Personally, I think it would be kind of cool to place them a bit higher up, so they look more detached from the body. I don't know why, but this kind of silhouette also makes me think about a multi-armed alien spacesuit. Or droid, perhaps with the head mounted on its chest. Maybe a mechanic droid holding all sorts of utensils, or anything else your imagination can suggest you, really. Who's there? Just like what happened with the dental floss plastic case, using fillable plastic Christmas balls or anything that's got a spherical shape, the upper limbs won't collide with the lower ones either. And cutting the upper part of the legs at a 45 degrees angle, you still can move them. Hold up! Yo, looking for some troubles, my friend? Exactly like what happened with squared plastic cases, roundish ones can also be used to make beautiful 4, 6-legged animal-looking creatures, but also random, absurd monstrosities, just like this one. Or this one. Okay, Danny Dan. I think we all got it. That's enough. If you're lucky enough to have in your collection of scraps a couple casings that fit together the way you want, then you can also consider to combine the two of them into a complex torso, perhaps like that one of a centaur. Or maybe even something like this. How many of you guys remember how cool this multibot toy was? Without any doubts, one of my all-time favorites. Making a compound torso means modifying two cases instead of just one, doubling your efforts. But good news is, making an extra pivot joint, you'll be able to gain another articulation point, that is that one of the waist, to reach a total of 8 points of articulation. As for the joints, I tried to recreate the classic T-shaped pivot joints, so much of a typical feature of the 5 points of articulation action figures. As I showed in the previous video, T-shaped pivot joints can be reproduced using some bits like these, that you might have amongst your collection of scraps, or you can also make your own using rods and pipes that fit together properly. I did the same thing in the past, making my first bot, my first action figure, actually. To make my DINOMONSTROSITY and most of the other figurines of this video, I provided every limb and head with a peg, and then used rubber rings like these to make the ending part. If you tear apart an ink printer, you'll find plenty of these rubber rings inside it. I usually use rubber rings like these to make pivotal joints because they both provide friction and won't let the limb come off the body of the figure. Extra friction is provided by the screw that locks the two halves of the enclosure in place. Another idea to make your action figures even cooler might be that one of providing them with pivoting turrets, laser cannons, radars, cameras, antennas, and so on. Looking at some iconic toy lines from the past, we find out that this was actually a pretty common feature. Look for example at Stridor's red frontal laser cannons. Or at the Starcom vehicle, which also had no less than 5 pivoting cannons. Yeah, that's right, I said had, because this one I found in a street market unfortunately lost all the 5 of them. And I felt like including this feature in my DINOMONSTROSITY, providing it with lateral cannons, as you can see. This was quite simple actually. I only had to plan ahead the design of the cannons, make sure they both have pegs that fit perfectly into these holes I made on both sides of the creature. Okay, Danny Dan, you have shown us all these possibilities to make our own action figures, but you still haven't told us yet how to prepare the casings. Alright, let's get to it. It's actually real simple. I first glued some extra plastic plates to cover the holes I found along the division line on both halves of the casing. Casings from laptop power cables are just like this. They've got holes. In order to secure the two halves of the casing in place, I tried to reproduce the exact closing mechanism that most electronic casings have, like this old clock radio case you're seeing here. I found a proper candidate in a wooden broomstick, which I cut at the same length of the distance between the inner walls of the two halves that make up the casing. Being the broomstick made of wood, it also provided an excellent grasp for the screw that holds everything together. I first glued one side of the stick onto the inner wall of the upper half of the case. I'm talking about the half that became the back of the dinosaur. Finally, a hole drilled on the other half of the casing, which in this specific example is the belly of the dinosaur, will host the screw that will help to keep the two halves close and tight. The main build of this video, besides being an attempt of mine to build an action figure, is also my attempt to scratch a build, the color of which is given by the colors of the scraps used to make the build itself. The only spots I painted with some highly covering silver paint are the little wooden beads used to make the knees, just because they look like wood. In fact, my idea was to only use a dark, dense wash to paint the model. These are some before and after shots of some parts of the build. In this case, I used the burnt amber oil color diluted in white spirit, hoping that it would help all the hundreds of bits with their different shapes and colors to blend together nicely. And also hoping that it would give the model a nice, weathered and dirty look. After the wash dried, I highlighted some spots like the rivets with the same silver paint I used before, and eventually performed a zenithal silver dry brush. It was very impressive actually to see how the oil wash made the background look all dirty and weathered, letting the details stand out from the rest. I intentionally avoid choosing black or dark colored bits and scraps, just because I imagined that with a darker background, the wash would not reach such great effect. In the next video, I'll try to push it a bit further, increasing the points of articulation of a really cool DIY action figure I want to make, with some cool diorama, glowing minerals from other solar systems, and other crazy features. Ew, somebody left a peach kernel! How rude! Thanks to all the animals that donated parts of themselves for the making of the monstrosities you saw in this clip. And as always, I'd like to welcome all the new subscribers to the channel. Welcome aboard! And a most heartfelt thank you goes to always support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting and sharing the contents. Thank you, you're great, bravo! I hope you liked the video, and till next time, you have a good one. Bye!